serious. What is the best unexplained mystery? Story 1. A really disturbing one that might be solved now. Who killed Katarzyna Zawada? Warning, this is not for the faint of heart. I am dead serious, do not read this before eating. She was a Polish college student, and thus most of the information is in Polish. There's not much information on her available in English, which is honestly a surprise given the details of the case. She went missing in November 1998. Then, on January 7, 1999, something got caught in a tugboat's propeller, so the operator stopped it to try to untangle it. He found something he described as pale and nondescript, with a really foul smell, and he couldn't tell what it was. Then he noticed an ear. He didn't find her body. He found her skin. It had been neatly cut off from her body around the thighs and neck, missing her arms and face, though still including her left ear. Investigators determined it had been in the river for 2 or 3 weeks by that point, and that it had been prepared to be worn like a suit. The rest of her body was never found aside from a leg found floating near a dam. One of the most horrifying and disturbing cases I've ever heard. Story 2. On May 31, 1998, around 1 p.m., the Krakow police received a phone call. An elderly man said there was a murder at his house in a tiny village near the city, and he believed his grandson was the murderer. In the house's basement, a corpse was hanging upside down from the ceiling. The victim, a 50-year-old man, had been beheaded, and the skin of his head and face was found at the scene. It was sewn to form a mask. The head was found outside the house. The murderer was a Russian immigrant, Vladimir W., the victim, his father Witaly. Interrogation revealed even more shocking details. Vladimir wore his father's face and clothes for a whole day, and pretended to be him in front of his grandfather, who didn't see very well. The motive, he said, was the hatred he felt towards his father after he cheated on his wife and left her with nothing in Nalchik, Russia, to pursue a new life in Poland with his son and father. It is possible that Vladimir knew Kasia. They both studied psychology on the University Jagiellonski, although they weren't in the same class. He started in 1992, she did in 1993, but dropped out after a year. He did not confess to killing. He is currently spending his 25-year sentence in a Russian jail, so he will be out in a few years, maybe 3-4. Sounds great. Story 3. The Silent Twins. June and Jennifer Gibbons. 2 twins. They only spoke to one another in a language they created. They also tried to kill each other on occasion. They were committed, where they both eventually decided that in order to live a normal life, one of them would have to die. So they decided which one of them would die. And then she did. Of heart failure. Inflammation of the heart, to be exact. The other went on to live a perfectly normal life. It's not so much an unsolved mystery as it is. WTF was all of this? What? How did they know they decided one needed to die? Why would one agree to die? How did she die from just deciding it? Why did I have to read this? I'm never getting this out of my head. Story 4. I find the story of Kaspar Hauser, an anonymous teenager found wandering the streets of Nuremberg in the early 19th century, fascinating. He appeared out of nowhere with no family, friends, or anyone who could confirm his identity. He claimed to have been kept in almost total isolation for his whole life up until that point. His linguistic skills were severely limited, consistent with someone who had grown up with very little human contact. Rumors began to circulate that he was actually a German prince who had been swapped at birth with a dead baby to prevent his succession to the throne by scheming relatives. Rather than kill him, they locked him up in complete isolation and left there to be forgotten, until somehow he was freed or managed to escape. He attracted several wealthy sponsors over the course of his short life, but none were successful at solving the mystery of his origins. He died under suspicious circumstances, stabbed by an unknown assailant, 5 years after being found. Of course, he may have just been a deranged fantasist or attention seeker. Who knows? Story 5. I read a short story based on this once in a collection of horror-themed short stories. The story was set in like 2050, where AI controlling house functions like air conditioning, door locks, security cameras, etc. was commonplace. Basically, the story just follows a teenage brother and sister having a costume party on Halloween, and someone points out that there are weird footprints leading up to the door, so the brother goes around looking for someone dressed like a goat or minotaur or horse or something. The brother describes the footprints to the house AI, who talks about that devil's footprint story in Exeter, Devon. The AI then says he can't see anyone in the house who is wearing anything resembling the footprints leading up to the house, but that he has oddly lost control of the locks and the air conditioning. Then the devil reveals himself to the party-goers and breathes a poison gas, saying everyone will die. The AI maintains that he cannot see or hear the devil, but everyone else can see and hear him, and eventually die to the gas. Story culminates with multiple houses found with dead people inside from a poison gas, suspected to be caused by a nearby factory that was leaking the same gas. Except the devil's footprints lead up to every single house affected, but no tracks lead away from them. Story 6. Man arrives at Haneda Airport, Tokyo, Japan. Everything seems normal until they ask his country of origin, which he gives as Tord. Tord does not exist. When confronted with this, he gave them his license and passport from Taurid. Now here's where you go, oh, he made fake documents, lol. Except that Taurid passport had authentic visa stamps from other countries he had traveled to. Meaning unless this man was able to successfully forge visa stamps from several countries including Japan, where he was. The company he was meeting with had no record of him, or the company he represented. The hotel he was going to had no reservation for a man with his name, and the bank on his checkbook did not appear to exist. When given a map, he pointed to where Andorra is, but said that country did not match Taurid, which has existed proudly for hundreds of years, and he had never heard of Andorra. They held him in a hotel overnight while they tried to sort it out, but in the morning he and all his documents were gone. Story 7. The disappearance of Maura Murray. Disappeared after crashing her car into a snowbank in the middle of the night in the Kankomagus region of National Highway. Some witnesses saw the crash and even spoke to her, but by the time the police arrived minutes later, she was gone, her personal effects strewn around the car and a rag stuffed in the tailpipe. K9s were used to track her scent, but it ended a few yards away from where she crashed. It's presumed that's where she was picked up or abducted by someone. Later that year, a man approached her parents and claimed his brother had kidnapped and killed her, but it was never proven. Story 8. The Crew murders is a pretty good one. A farming couple were murdered, and their bodies were dumped in a river. After they were missing for a week, their home was searched, and their still-living baby daughter was found there. The wife's father was convicted of the crime, but later released when it was discovered that the detective inspectors in charge of investigating had falsified evidence to implicate him. The actual murderer has never been identified. What makes it interesting is that doctors believe that during the week her parents were at the bottom of the river weighted down with car parts. Someone was regularly feeding the baby. Story 9. Woman started getting anonymous letters asking her to confess to having an affair with the superintendent of schools in the area. Letters increased in frequency and became more threatening. After a while, they seemed to stop, then started again one day. Someone phoned her house. Her husband picked up and claimed to know who was writing the letters and left the house with his gun. They found his car crashed. He was dead. His gun had fired 2 bullets. His blood alcohol limit was insane, even though everyone who knew him claims he was not a heavy drinker. Letters kept coming in, and monuments on her bus route started popping up that threatened her. One day she saw a sign saying R.I.P., her daughter's name. She stopped the bus and tried to tear it off. Luckily, she did not. It was booby-trapped with a gun to fire at whoever tore it up. The gun's serial number was scratched off, but they did find out it belonged to her brother-in-law. He was sent to jail, despite pleading his innocence, but the letters kept coming to her, and even to him. He was eventually released, and used the internet to put up all the details to get others to help solve it. I think, up until 2001, they were still being sent to her, her family, and wider residents of Circleville. The writer even sent a message to Unsolved Mysteries, warning them against going after the local sheriff, who was accused of helping to cover up the person doing it, or trying to lower reported crime rates to profit from funding. Story 10. Probably my favorite unsolved mystery is the Eileen Moore lighthouse mystery. Basically, the 3 lighthouse keepers disappeared from the island. Inside the lighthouse, they found uneaten meals on the table and missing coats, among other weird things. The creepy part is the logbook. It's supposed to be used strictly for logging work-related entries, but they started using it as a sort of journal/diary. It was explained in the logbook how there was a terrible storm that was lasting for many days, and that one of the keepers, an old, weathered seaman, was crying in fear. The last entry said that the storm had ended, and everything was calm and fine. A neighboring island reported that there was never a storm. Story 11. So I have a personal experience, sort of. My father had a coworker who was a great guy. Good at his work, fun to talk to, nobody had any complaints about him. He lived in an apartment right next to work, so the night watchman at the workplace would see him whenever he went out. So one night, he went out in his pajamas, talking on his cell phone, nodded at the watchman. The watchman didn't think much of it after all. It's not all that weird to take a walk even though it was quite late. He didn't think much of it. The watchman didn't see him come back, but he figured he missed him when he went on his bathroom break probably. But the guy didn't show up at work the next day. Someone from work went to check up and he wasn't there. Nothing was disturbed, he was just gone. Everyone thought he had dropped dead, killed by thugs or an accident or some medical condition. The workplace filed a police report. Here's when it gets weird. It turns out the guy had created a fake identity. Any credentials he had given were fake. The references he had given had never heard of him. The family address he'd given didn't exist. The police didn't find anything illegal in the apartment. They didn't find anything that would give a clue as to who he was either. We moved away a few years ago, but I don't think the case was ever solved. It's definitely the best unexplained mystery that I've personally come across. Story 12. Huska Castle creeps me out. Basically, this Bohemian fortress was constructed on top of an ancient Slavo-Germanic pagan ritual site, which was a very deep hole. Nothing too weird about that except for the way the castle was built. For one, it's built in a useless position and served no strategic purpose, so it was not desirable for medieval lords of Bohemia or any invaders to control. Then people realized that the castle was actually inverted. The fortifications were on the inside. Arrow slits, turrets, thick fortress walls slanting into the castle, etc. It's as if they were trying to keep something inside. There's a legend that a Bohemian king lowered a prisoner into the hole that the castle was built on, and he began screaming, so they pulled him back up, and he had aged 60 years and died. Then, during World War II, the Nazis did actually occupy the castle for a time, but they reported some strange sounds, and when Allied forces stormed the castle, the Nazis were dead or abandoned the place. For sure there's some folklore involved with the place, but the fact that the castle was built clearly to keep something inside opposed to out, and even the Nazis had issues with it. It definitely makes it seem like some ancient horror lies within that hole. Huska Castle was built on top of an ancient pagan hole with fortifications inside, not outside as if to keep something in, not out. Nazis tried occupying the castle but ended up dead or abandoned it. Story 13. Rico Harris. He was a massive 6 feet 9 inch former Harlem Globetrotter basketball player who had drug issues earlier in his life, but had made a full recovery and was getting his life back on track. He was driving along California's Interstate 1-5 from his home in Southern California to Seattle to live with his girlfriend. He was somewhere just north of Sacramento, exhausted, and told his girlfriend over the phone that he wanted to check out the mountains. All calls stopped since then. His car was found a couple days later by a patrolman near a rest stop in the mountains. A massive search was launched. No signs of him. The strangest part? A driver later reported seeing a massive 6 feet 9 inch individual wandering down the highway, just a mile from where the car was found. A week later. A search was relaunched. Massive size 17 footprints were found in the ground that were not there before. They were getting very close, and then nothing. No trace, no body. Nothing. Where did Rico go the first time he disappeared? Where was he for an entire week? And where did he disappear to again? The fact that someone could disappear twice is what makes this so damn mystifying to me. Story 14. My usual answer is the Springfield 3, but another baffling case is the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre. February 10th, 1990, 2 men robbed a bowling alley in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They got away with about $5,000, but left some money that was visible to them behind. Surviving witnesses stated that the men seemed to be looking for something. 7 people were shot, 4 died, 3 of them being children. No arrests or even suspects. Story 15. Disappearance of Asha Degree. She was a shy 9-year-old girl who randomly left her house around 2 a.m. on Valentine's Day, 2000, in pouring rain. Her backpack was found later, but she never was. It's even stranger because some of the more common explanations for child disappearances don't apply here. For example, there was no computer in her house, so she couldn't have met some stranger who lured her out. She did well in school and she had a supportive family, so none of the typical reasons children run away. She was also extremely afraid of dogs, so it was out of character for her to go walking around alone. Story 16. The Campden Wonder. In England, 1660, a 70-year-old man named William Harrison was walking a few miles to the next village when he disappeared. Later, they found his clothes covered in blood, including his hat, which looked like it had been slashed open. Harrison's servant, John Perry, pleads guilty to the act and is executed along with his brother and their mother. 2 years later, William Harrison returns to his village alive, having found his way back to England on a ship from Portugal. The guy claims to have been sold into slavery in Turkey, but the story makes no sense because how would Turkish slavers get to England? And even then, why would they capture a frail old man to do slave labor? To this day, nobody has any idea why the servant confessed to murder they didn't commit, or what actually happened to Harrison.